good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on our climate panel. And can tech save the world when it comes to climate? We've got some really cool lightning talks coming up, followed by a panel discussion, and we're going to be covering climate tech and data, law, governance, and building decarbonisation as well. I'm joined by Anna and Michelle, and I'll let them introduce themselves when they do their talks. They have really interesting bios, and I can't wait to hear what they're going to share with us. But I have the privilege of kicking us off. So my name is Laurence Watson. I've been working in this sort of intersection of climate and tech, and with a bit of policy thrown in for the last 10 years for quite a few different climate not-for-profits. And my current work is with an organization called Subak, which is an accelerator for data-driven climate not-for-profits. And I'm going to tell you all about a project that we've been doing there called our data catalog, which is all about improving access to climate data. Following me, then we will have Anna, and then we will have Michelle, and then we will have a panel discussion. So if you have questions as we go through, there's the Q&A function that you'll see at the bottom of Zoom. Feel free to throw stuff in there. If it's for a specific panelist, do just tag them with their name as well. We may be able to do questions as they come, or the Data Science Festival staff, amazing Jess and Lizzie, may answer some things if they're able to, and otherwise we'll pick them all up in the panel. You are able to upvote and downvote, well, not downvote, excuse me, just upvote questions if you like the look of them, and otherwise, yeah, we'll get to that later. So, kicking us off is my lightning talk. So, improving access to climate data. So just to say a little bit more about Subak. So it's a name that we've actually taken or borrowed from the 8th century Indonesia, where it means the system for managing water if you imagine these sort of stepped green farming terraces. Now water then sort of flows down from the top to the bottom. So if people at the top use too much, that has an effect downstream. And the Subak was a sort of community system to manage this commons. So it was a system of sort of deciding and decision making, but also you know, sort of planning and sharing. And we thought that was a really nice analogy. And for us, data is our water around sort of climate, and sharing data is one way that we can collaborate, though it's not the only way. So we're philanthropically funded. We have an accelerator program for organizations, and we try and fix some sort of systemic problems. And we heard from everybody that climate data and access to good quality data was a problem that just kept coming up. So we know, so we actually have a third panelist who who has just joined us, Emelia. Welcome, Emelia. Awesome. Emelia, I'll tag you in a bit. So what we heard from a lot of our community is climate and energy data is spread out all over the place. It's totally fragmented, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, whatever domain you're working in. There's all this sort of stuff spread out across different places. And then even within organizations, it can be quite fragmented and people don't know where things are. It's often sort of quite project-based. So you spin up and do a load of work for a specific project, and then you, when it's done, you know, do you label everything and make sure it's all wrapped up neatly, or you just get on to the next one? And things aren't always connected very well. And we know that connected data is much more useful than just sort of data in silos or in a data lake, or unstructured, or however it might be. So that was some of the user research that sort of informed some of the sketching out that we thought we could do in terms of trying to tackle this issue. And some of the problems around incentives, in some ways, again, it's a commons. I think when people share data, or you make stuff available, or you buy into open source and you put stuff out there, a lot of the time you don't necessarily directly benefit from it. You don't get something back immediately. Maybe you get something back over the long term, but often, you know, it doesn't do anything for you. And in some ways as well, people see data as a liability. They just say, well, if people can look at what we've done or how we've done it, you know, that is potentially a risk. So all sorts of barriers why people don't share but we had a strong belief that if we could have a sort of culture shift, this would have a big impact on the ecosystem as a whole and would speed up everybody who's trying to use climate data, from startups to campaigners to sort of policy analysts to everybody else, all sorts of data practitioners. So we wanted to improve sort of discoverability. We wanted to make things more trustworthy, and we wanted to connect everything up. Easy to say, difficult to implement. So we thought about different mechanisms to achieve those goals. So I said we're an accelerator at Subak. So we have had 11 organizations go through our accelerator. We fund them, we put them on a course, and we train them across a whole range of things, but definitely in data and technology. And what I've spent a lot of time doing is just trying to help people understand what actually is available, in terms of there's so many things that you can do, not quite off the shelf, but that are so much easier than you could do before, just in terms of machine learning, in terms of like satellites and remote sensing. You know, a lot of stuff is much more plug and play, and you can do a lot with a small team that you couldn't do before. So here's our sort of illustration of all sorts of individual organizations doing their own thing, and then here is a sort of happier visualization where they've pooled their data into this place, which ultimately sort of has become a bit of a portal. And what we wanted to do with the catalog, and then this benefits the next person, basically. They can then have visibility and understand how all the good stuff has happened, what was useful, what wasn't, and just gives them a huge running start and a boost. What's my next slide? So what we wanted to do was not host all the data ourselves. We just wanted to signpost and say, this is where everything is. We just wanted to increase all that visibility. So what we ended up building was basically a metadata catalog, which is slightly more awkward, but we weren't really concerned about hosting ourselves. And that meant that we could do a lot more cross-domain stuff. So we could try and index academia, index government data sets, index all sorts of places, and bring a sort of unified search. Part of the challenge there was around sort of metadata standards, and we get into vocabularies to design data sets. So things like DCAT and RDF, which is the RDF vocabulary. Again, I find this personally quite dry, but it's definitely like completely necessary in order to actually make different data sets interoperable. And so DCAT is specifically a language, a vocabulary specification that allows web catalogs of data to talk to each other. So it's basically a standardized list of fields saying, you know, this is the name, this is the description, except there's a vast amount of it. So we created our own schema that we thought was the right fit for climate data, that sort of balanced the specificity and the generalities, and tried to make it easy for people to fill out. So for data people like yourselves, perhaps this, you know, you won't be turned off by this, but we had to think about how to make this accessible. So what we've built is data.subak.org, and I will now just go straight there. So it's built on CCAN, which is this very widely used open source tool that data.gov, for example, uses, and we've reskinned it and added some of our own plugins and our own custom functionality. But it does sort of basically what you'd imagine it to do. You put in search terms. It uses Solr as the search engine on the back end, and Postgres. And we put in transmission. We find a load of stuff that we've scraped in from different places. Transmission losses in Guinea, transmission losses in UK or Cameroon. And you can add data, you can search, you can do it by organization. We've put in a few things. So we've created this showcase where we want to go topic by topic and give people a really solid starting point to get into a particular topic from a data perspective. So we've got things that are tagged, we've got sort of curated data sets that we think would be useful for people. But this is something we want to sort of lean into and do a lot more with. And we also are trialing sort of concierge service. So if you don't find what you're looking for, you can go down to the bottom. I think it's on the front page as well, and you can ask us to find it for you. And lots of other sort of bells and whistles and things that I won't spend any more time on. I'll leave it there in terms of demo, but please do explore yourselves and welcome people's feedback if it is useful, and we hope it is. And as I said, the plan is to think about how we can leverage the crowd in order to get people to add and augment data sets, putting their own comments on them over time, which hopefully will increase trust. We have plans to make it all more interconnected, and we plan to sort of go topic by topic. We've got a lot of power stuff in there. We'll do decarbonisation of transport. we'll do remote sensing, and we'll sort of cross it off topic by topic as we go. And that's about it. That's the lightning talk. I think I'll stop there and keep it snappy. Thank you all very much. So we can, if there are particular questions, we can come back to them later. Amelia, tagging you in. I added the point before daylight savings. Yes, let's not make this a talk about about times and dates libraries, because they're a massive pain, as we know. But Emelia, are you there, and would you like to go for it and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. Apologies. Yeah, I had the event for an hour past. So I'm here now though, and I am going to talk to you all today. Let me share my screen. All right. Do you all see my slides?
Yeah, looking good.
Amazing. Okay, great. So today I'm going to talk about environmental data as a public good, and a little bit of the barriers and the opportunities that we've found from these things. I'm Emelia Williams from the Open Environmental Data Project. So environmental data as a public good, what does that mean in practice? So first, let's break down environmental data a little bit, just so we're all on the same page. I know that we got a little bit of information about climate data from Laurence, but environmental data includes a lot more than that. So we know that it can take many forms. And so it could be maybe a data set with air quality information, or a public comment from a lived experience of methane leaks, or a photo of stormwater runoff in a neighborhood, or any of these forms listed here. So there's quantitative data, qualitative data, it's all equally valid. And when multiple forms are used together, they can really create a greater representation of a situation overall. And then a public good. I'm going to take us all back to Econ 101 and talk about public goods. So public good is non-rival and non-excludable. So everyone can use it. It's not possible to keep someone from using it, and someone's use can't limit someone else's use. This is the perfect idea of a public good. And in practice, it gets a lot messier. So common examples include fresh air, national defense, or streetlights. But as we all know, someone's access to fresh air might be compromised by a nearby industrial facility, and the street lighting on someone's street might be determined by their neighborhood. So what does it mean when environmental data works as a public good, and what does it allow us to do? So when environmental data is working as a public good, we can accomplish two broad goals, and that is understanding and accountability. And so environmental data helps us paint a picture of our natural and built environment. It allows us to understand what's happening, when, how that's changing, how it might affect a community nearby. We can really understand the world using environmental data, and that is crucial for both small and large decision makers alike to prioritize policy, allocate funding, and protect both environmental and human health. So for example, COP27 is going on right now, and there are efforts to bolster the quality and use of data related to greenhouse gases, forests, oceans, ecosystems. And so tools like the one in the screen grab on the left have been introduced at this COP. This one is called Climate Trace, and it maps and tracks real-time atmospheric carbon emissions. I have it zoomed in on the United Kingdom for the audience, but this data helps negotiators and countries refine their pledges, understand how funding could be allocated, and really what the most urgent issues are at hand to address. So the flip side of this is accountability. Understanding allows for accountability and allows for evidence to be created that will help keep polluting industries regulated, set up protections for vulnerable populations, and create responsive adaptations. So I have a little example on the right here. So work at Fairtech Collective and Create Lab has led to the development of the Smell Pittsburgh app. It's a mobile phone app designed to engage Pittsburgh residents in tracking pollution odors across the region. And so this allows users and community members to make note of when odors are frequently concentrated and link those smell events to poor air quality in or upwind from those areas. And so these smell reports are then sent back to the county health department daily, along with daily aggregate geographic analyses of these reports. And so these reports can be used to support campaigns for stricter regulations concerning local industrial sites. And that's no small feat. So if environmental data and working as a public good is beneficial to all on the planet, what is stopping its applications? This is the gotcha moment. There are 4 key barriers as we see it, including a lack of awareness. So a lack of awareness points to the unavailability and inaccessibility of some of these data sets. And this also points to the digital divide that keeps communities with low digital literacy, maybe a lack of internet access, or just less technological resources from using environmental data. We also see the barrier of overabundance or mismatches. This refers to the inability to use data just because there's either too much available, it's not organized in a usable manner, or when there is data, it's not there in the degree of granularity that they need. This turns data into an obstacle that needs to be overcome instead of a tool or a resource for understanding and accountability. The third is the potential of misuse in environmental data. So because of environmental and climate data, how it's proliferated, the potential rights abuses, manipulation, and potential for maladaptive responses to climate and environmental crises increases. This is especially pertinent with Indigenous communities and environmental and climate justice communities, because we want to avoid continuing extractive and transactional relationships, especially with data sharing. And the fourth, last but not least, environmental data requires better digital infrastructure. So currently the technical and social system surrounding data is siloed, antiquated, and updated too infrequently to be of real use. And there is attention needed to create and facilitate infrastructures that really prioritize interoperability, collaborative structures, and standard setting. And with these barriers in mind, I kind of want to turn to ways that we can make environmental data more of a public good and address these barriers with opportunities. In the service of time, I'm going to focus on the last 2. So addressing the potential for misuse. First off, I want to address the tension between opening up data fully for use and respecting the needs of community data when sharing with outside stakeholders could present a risk or a liability for those community members. This kind of puts a wrinkle in the idea of a public good, but it definitely helps create a safer data commons for all. So for example, an Indigenous tribe may have ecological knowledge that they don't want to share with non-Indigenous folks or researchers for the fear of extractive abuse. Another example, community members might have data on lead pipes in their homes that could lead to the risk of property devaluations. This data is still needed for certain folks to use this data to create solutions, but it might not need to be open and available for all to use at any given time. So there are some tools that respect and address this tension. I think there's an opportunity to explore the potential for metadata tagging systems that could indicate who and when data could be accessed and used and analyzed. I'll point to the work of an organization called Local Context, who's doing work out in New Zealand around Indigenous cultural knowledge, and they've created a platform where data owners can submit tags that indicate who has permission to access and for what purposes, and can actually help identify who has primary authority for this data. I have a little image of some of the tags that they use there, indicating who can use what access or what data or what artifact. This kind of tagging has yet to be adapted or seriously studied in an environmental data setting, and our team at OEDP plans to explore the technical and governance needs and applications of a tagging system in the new year. The second barrier I want to address is addressing the lack of critical digital infrastructure. And so I only have time to talk about one tool that presents opportunities, but I wanted to talk about the creation and use of APIs. But I know that there are myriad other opportunities in this realm, and we can talk about those maybe in the questions. APIs, or application program interfaces, present an opportunity to connect data sets and allows for greater interoperability and reuse. So while APIs are really common on other spaces in the internet and other digital infrastructure, they're not always open, and they're not super well documented and not always intuitively designed, which really limits their use. But when they are well designed and documented, APIs can integrate data in a wide range of digital applications. So a great example of a well-designed API is from Water Reporter. It allows applications to call water quality data from state data portals, community science projects, and other sources. It has been used by agencies in the US, like the California State Water Resources Board and the Maryland Department of the Environment. There is more work to be done to make sure that APIs are provided openly and are intuitively designed for community use. So I have a couple of simple and straightforward takeaways that build on some of the opportunities that I've mentioned. So environmental data is a piece of a larger puzzle. It means a lot to me personally, and it's essential for us to understand environmental realities and call for accountability within our social and political systems. And this will be essential for climate and environmental justice moving forward. But to answer the question that this panel's title asks, I don't think that tech and data can save the world. There is no silver bullet, tech or otherwise, but we can leverage their power to serve the needs of communities facing crises. And to end the presentation on a hopeful note, there is space for tons of different kinds of people in the environmental data ecosystem. If you're a technical data person or a policy nerd, I say that lovingly, I'm a part of that camp, a designer, a scientist, a community member collecting data, there is space for you in the environmental data ecosystem, whether that's exploring the use of tagging systems or developing open hardware tools or opening up APIs or a million other ways. There are tons of opportunities to apply environmental data as a public good, and I hope this talk has inspired you to look into them. Thanks for having me. And I think Anna is up next.
Yes, exactly. Good evening or morning or afternoon, depending on where you're based. And exactly, so I've the kind support of our team to share the slides. Many thanks. So I think the hopeful note of Emelia really trigger what can become the start of my presentation, which actually is going to focus on, let's say, the legal angle. And I know talking about law is never nice, especially at 7 p.m. in the evening. So I'd like to warm you up, first launching 2 polls. So I'd like to ask the first poll to be launched. Exactly. So have you ever heard about the right to contribute to environmental information? So please choose either yes, no, or maybe if you are unsure. Let's ask you all to just make a choice, and we will soon see the results. And if you're thinking, oh, what is this right to contribute to environmental information? No worries, because this is really what's the, let's say, whole presentation is going to be about. Okay, 96% no. This is amazing, because it really makes a good starting point for this small speech. And please, second poll. So, have you ever gathered evidence of an environmental issue? Yes, no, maybe. Thank you. And thinking to your daily life, either if you are a community member, an institution, or you have a particular mandate to gather environmental evidence, then I would be particularly interested to know in which, let's say, context you did gather any evidence. And we will soon see the results. Yes, okay, this is very interesting, because basically half of you did and half of you didn't, and a tiny minority maybe, you're unsure. Okay, this is great. Many thanks. So I think this is a good start to kind of walk in the presentation. So next slide, please. Thank you. Okay.
Bear with Anna.
Yes, no worries. So let me start just saying that this title, like ordinary people appropriate environmental information. How does it happen concretely? So my presentation will focus on something that I frame as the turn to sensing. What is a turn to sensing? Is when ordinary people that are concerned about a climate or environmental matter, so think to extreme weather events, environmental degradation, and many more, and decide to just use their bare senses or basic instrument to monitor the surrounding environment. Next, please. And when this occurs, it's particularly interesting because in a way, I use the word appropriate because ordinary people do jump on information as Emelia was saying, a resource, and they do appropriate it because it was formerly belonging to, let's say, a different actor, for example, a private company, government, or it was just not there. So what they are doing is that they are resisting, contesting mainstream way to govern environmental information. Please, next. So something I'm particularly interested is sensing beyond the reliance on technology. And this evening we were asked to reflect on, can tech save the world? I agree with Emelia, no, but I think watchful people can. So if we all turn to sensing, so if we all start becoming watchful citizens, watchful people, we are doing basically two things at once. First, we are reversing this trend of being more and more detached from nature, which makes us feel kind of alien from what is occurring in our climate around us, in our environment. But at the same time, we instill care for the environment in our basically daily life, in the way we walk to our workplaces, in the way we return home. We are constantly monitoring. Next, please. And why it's important to focus on basic, kind of back to the basics sensing, because in a way, more and more we see that civic monitoring initiatives do tend to focus on technology as enabler of agency from below. So actually, are the people that should shape which technology is needed, if it's needed at all. And this is why I wanted to quote here movements such as the Not Aligned Technology movement that is trying to bring in different understanding of technology that is contesting Western values and an understanding of technology that kind of makes the initiative. No, actually, I'm really interested in those initiatives that start with an issue, start with a community, and eventually embrace technology. Next, please. In a way, when we look to how people appropriate environmental information, we should be also clear in kind of disclaiming the potential risks. And similar to rights such as freedom of expression, any right, and I will return to this clearly, to contribute to environmental information can exist only if counterbalances are foreseen in order to avoid, let's say, infodemics, and that data, environmental science becomes even more politicized. Next, please. So this small intro to bring you to Sensing for Justice. So this is the project I've funded 3 years ago and that I'm running at the European Commission Joint Research Center. This is the EU Science Hub. So it's basically the research center tasked with advising the European Commission on their policies, basically from environmental to social to nuclear and in several other fields. Next, please. I know time is short, so I will probably need to return to some points during the Q&A, but this is why we have a Q&A. Sensing for Justice is a research project with 3 key aims. First, we are trying to research how evidence gathered by ordinary people can enter courts. So basically environmental litigation to demonstrate environmental and lately climate harms. So more and more we are also focusing on climate litigation. Second, as we understand that the judicial, it's not the ultimate answer, it's often not good for the environment to wait for a court to decide. We're also looking to how monitoring, civic monitoring, can actually alleviate the conflicts, mediate the conflicts. And third, and this is why I asked to you, we're advocating for the recognition of a new right, a right to contribute to environmental and climate information when the official one is scarce. Next, please. So I would like to skip just these, thanks, and skip also these, thanks, and just focus on these, because as several of you said no to the right to contribute, I just would like to stress why this is important. So the right to contribute to environmental information at present is not recognized. We will discuss later the Aarhus Convention, but let's say overarching legal documents that exist in the US, in the EU, in Latin America, recognize the right to access information and to participate in the formation of environmental information, but they don't recognize civic actors as a source of environmental data. Yet more and more this is occurring, and as the little drawings that you see around in this presentation show, these are all instances taken during fieldwork of ordinary people that were actually filling institutional informational gaps. So areas where institutional appointed authorities weren't able to monitor, to oversee an environmental issues. And the sentinels jumped in to fill these gaps. So why a right to contribute is important? Because more and more these actors are exposing themselves to risk, and the presence of a kind of overarching right could legitimize their action while shielding them from adverse outcomes. For example, next slide, please. The legal risks. Basically, more and more, and I think colleagues in the US are way aware of SLAPs, which are the strategic lawsuit against public participation. I'm an environmental lawyer myself. Often I'm reached by ordinary people that for doing their monitoring were brought to court, or at least kind of threatened to be brought to court. Recognizing a right that every single person has to contribute to environmental information when this is meaningful. So when there is an institutional informational gap, could be really useful to shield participants, sentinels in the many souths of our world, where being a sentinel can be also quite risky for your own, let's say, health, safety, but eventually also for legal outcomes. Next, please. Here, we're also focusing on how this is accelerated by crisis. So more and more we see the climate crisis, the pandemic, social crisis mounting, and all these make a sort of sense that the social contract and the delegation of monitoring tasks to institutions doesn't make sense anymore. Next, please. And this is why we are, with Census, really looking at how new legitimized actors emerge and how they emerge. They emerge defending that the data they gathered is actually scientifically sound and meaningful. Next, please. So we question which governance and legal adaptations are needed. And for the next slide, as time is running short, I would just ask you to pass over, and I'm mentioning them while we work through. So there are two avenues through which we could really recognize civic monitoring. One is the policy uptake. Next, please. And the policy updates is really when there is no legal recognition, but political institutions still decide to recognize the data coming from the citizen, and they do so by, for example, relying on this data in their intervention. Next, please. And this is actually a way to kind of resist the system while being represented. So oftentimes, this is a form of, let's say, light recognition that makes a lot of sense for those initiatives that are kind of, they don't want to be legally recognized because they don't recognize the institution themselves. Next, please. But there is another interesting, next, we cannot, unfortunately, the time is not enough. So next as well. There is another interesting avenue, which is actually to inquire the judicial uptake. Next. And one very interesting approach was what several communities around the world are adopting, monitoring and bringing the data they gather to courts. Next, please. As occurred in the groundbreaking Formosa case, where fishers, basically fisherwomen in particular, led by Diane Wilson, a shrimper, managed to bring a petrochemical company to court, mostly based on evidence gathered from below. So this is groundbreaking exactly because the court didn't challenge where the data would come from, but was looking at data as facts of an environmental harm, of a wrongdoing. And this was basically citizen science in court without being framed as such. Next, please. So I would like to basically conclude to say that Sensing for Justice, the project, is encountering the plaintiffs where they are, so the actors that bring this evidence to court. And we do so basically through, next please, what I call, also next, here you find more evidence. Next please. What I frame as kind of a creative ethnography. So as many actors we address are not, let's say, academics, they mostly don't speak English. The Formosa case, clearly yes, but the farmers in south of Italy, definitely not. We decided to go where they are through creative methods. And for example, we created this story of a civic sentinel, which is an open access graphic novel. And next, please. Visual methods. So more and more, we try to illustrate our findings, for example, about legal risk, about rights, in a way that is accessible and meaningful for ordinary people. Next, please. And we found that a particularly valuable approach was actually to illustrate our consent forms. So illustrate the law behind our research. And next, please. Another particularly interesting approach we choose is to use theater to kind of engage our participants and also to slowly elicit reactions from those people that attended our theatrical shows. And we are also slowly transitioned to new fields, such as that of climate displaced people, which are, of course, more difficult to reach than a kind of static community. But we are working hard with mediators to also get in these places. So next, please. Open questions. We have the Q&A, and then last slide, I'd like just to thank you for your attention and just share that recently Sensus got a really nice prize for opening the science behind evidence of environmental harms at Falling Walls Science Summit in Berlin, which was basically a great recognition for all the sentinels around the world that are fighting hard to have their evidence recognized in court. So I thank you very much. Thank you also for the technical support, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A. Great. And I'm passing the word to Laurence or Michelle. I think Michelle is...
Michelle, go for it.
Yes.
Hi, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Can you see it now?
I still can't see it. I'm afraid.
Oh, sorry.
Keep going.
Is it coming up now?
Still no from me. I don't know if anybody else can. Aha. Oh, yeah, there it is.
Great, you can see it. Oh,
Yeah.
brilliant. Great. Well, thank you so much to all the other panelists for your really interesting talks. And I'm going to be building on how data can be used by people to accelerate climate action. So I'm Michelle, I'm Talana's sustainability lead. And Talana is a climate technology company for the built environment. We work with social housing landlords and commercial landlords to drive action. So if you're on this call, I'm sure you're very aware of the issues we're facing. The world is at a critical turning point. We are facing three huge challenges: a climate crisis, energy insecurity, and fuel poverty. And the verdict across industries and governments is unanimous. We are not doing enough. As I'm sure you will have seen with COP27, the UN Secretary General was quoted as saying, we're on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. So Talana was born out of a desire to address environmental and social good in the built environment. And we see our mission as accelerating net zero. We chose to focus on the built environment because buildings account for 39% of global emissions. And we're also seeing rising levels of fuel poverty, so it offers a good aggregation point. We already know how to get to net zero in buildings, but the problem is we're not moving fast enough, which is where we see Talana coming in as pointing the way forward for social housing landlords and commercial landlords. And we do this by joining the dots between data analytics, performance guarantees, and efficient funding to overcome the key barriers. Now, this entire process is underpinned by data of buildings, energy usage data, and any other data that providers are able to share with us. And we call this an ecosystem approach. So when customers come to us, they will give us information on their portfolio of buildings, be that 3,000 homes or 50,000 homes. And we will use that data as our starting point. We will analyze it to create building digital twins. We will overlay that with retrofit scenarios. And we will then quantify the risk of underperformance and connect to private finance. Now, what this does is it connects stakeholders across the value chain and aligns what can be done from a technical perspective with what can be insured and funded. Now, this is really important because too often projects to save energy efficiency in buildings are designed by engineers in isolation. And while they may come up with the most incredible designs that will result in complete net zero and possibly even carbon positive homes, they can't be funded. They'll cost a fortune and they can only be done on one or two properties. So what we do is we make sure that we can address as many buildings as possible to fuel decarbonisation works. And we see this as standardising the route between engineering and finance. And what this means for our social housing landlords is that they get a scalable route to net zero. Social housing providers are facing a 96 billion funding deficit at the moment. and they have to retrofit 5 million homes. By taking a software-led approach, we show customers on a platform all their buildings and how they can get them to net zero. By quantifying the risk of underperformance, we can transfer risk through insurance. And what this effectively means is we guarantee the kilowatt hour savings of projects. We use this to connect to private finance, funding up to 80% of the costs. And we ensure that day one bill savings are left with residents to help address fuel poverty. This overcomes some of the key barriers facing execution of net zero efforts in the built environment. But this is the package our customers see. In the kind of iceberg analogy that I'm sure you will have all seen, there's a lot going on in the background. So things like agent-based modeling, real-time risk analytics, digital twinning, software as a service. And it's this that I want to talk to you about, of how our data leads to action. So this is a screenshot of our platform. When we take providers' data, it's often quite patchy. There might be data inconsistencies or just data gaps. So to account for this, we use a meta model and an inference engine. Essentially, this means we have a library of building characteristics based on building archetypes. So how buildings are grouped dependent on if it's a flat, if it's a house, if it's insulated, etc. And we use this to fill in the gaps. And so that's the first bit of the puzzle, meeting customers where they are with their data and using AI and open source data to overcome barriers. The second point is stochastic analysis. So there's a lot we know about buildings. We know when it was built, we know how many floors it has, and we know what the floor size it has. But there are a lot of things that are uncertain, such as how many devices are plugged in at a certain time, what hours does the occupant use the building? Does it always stay the same? What if they're meeting friends one night and that completely changes the model? And so we use stochastic analysis to overcome and account for this uncertainty. The way stochastic analysis works, it essentially looks at lots of different scenarios of the same thing you're modeling and creates different probability functions to understand what the most likely scenario is. This enables us to undertake deep what-if questions to be able to provide people with the most holistic view of their buildings. This is an approach that has been validated with the New York State Energy Research Department, where they gave us 4 building characteristics: age, location, size, and type of use. And when we modeled this on our platform, it was over 90% accurate when compared to actual consumption data. Now, this is all very good on one building, but how do you get to the scale we need to retrofit the 5 million social homes we have in the UK? To address this, we take a rapid, limited, agent-based approach. Agent-based modeling is where you break down building systems into their smallest component parts. And then to understand how a new building works, you just plug those parts in together. This means that instead of constantly reinventing the wheel for building modeling, you already have a predefined formula of how different parts work. You just have to figure out how those different parts fit together. This allows us to run thousands of simulations at the same time, as agent-based modeling requires less computational power, and it also allows us to provide a clear picture of the decarbonisation opportunities across the portfolio. So for example, here you can see this is on 10,000 homes and shows that the payback period for retrofitting the buildings will be 25 years and will require a £34 million investment. What this is really exciting, what's really exciting about this is what it enables. So stochastic analysis, those probability functions I talked about before, help us quantify the risk of underperformance. And this allows us to guarantee project outcomes. This delivers one key thing. It provides confidence to landlords, to residents, and to funders. And that enables projects to move forward at a greater scale and speed than they would otherwise be able to do. We have integrated that risk analysis with an A-rated insurer who then guarantees the project outcomes. This enables us to finance the savings on the bill, which in turn we can use to raise private finance to fund the works. What this leads to is it delivers affordable warmth for residents. They get day one bill savings that are guaranteed, at the same time as getting a better home, while the landlords reach their decarbonisation targets and ultimately take positive climate action. So this is an example project that we've been working on for a local authority in the UK. They had 30,000 homes and knew they wanted to retrofit 10,000 of them. They had a very clear route of what this would look like, which we modelled. And we found that what they wanted, unfortunately, wasn't financially feasible. What they wanted would take 40 years to pay back, and it was just far too expensive, and the risk of underperformance was too high. So we reconfigured some of the retrofit options. We removed external wall insulation and heat pumps, and instead focused more on solar panels and batteries. And in doing so, we were able to model a scenario for 10,000 homes where the payback would be 13 years, the investment would be 69 million, and the carbon emissions saved annually would be 12 million kilograms of CO2 emissions equivalent. What this meant was that this project was able to start moving, it was able to be actioned, and ultimately that residents could experience day one bill savings. So I just want to leave you with a call to action. The climate crisis, the climate crisis can feel very overwhelming, as can the situation with fuel poverty in this country right now. However, we can choose for the transition to be just, and we can choose to use technology to improve both environmental and social good. And that's what we see as an imperative at Tulana. And that is what drives our work with social housing landlords to ensure that we secure a sustainable future for all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. That was great. Thank you, Emelia. Thank you, Anna. Those were really interesting talks. And I hope everybody enjoyed them as much as I did, which was very much. Everyone, if you'd like to turn on your cameras and microphones, and we'll have a general chat. I thought that was so interesting, and I think there's sort of clear link between the talks, not just around data, but the sort of use of data and governance. I want to start just with a sort of so everybody, please bung in any questions you'd like to in the Q&A function. But to start us off, I'd just like to say a really broad one, which is, what do you all think institutions or companies, I guess sort of large organizations, should be doing to have the most impact on climate at the moment? And maybe if we go in reverse order from what we've spoke, so Michelle, Anna, and then Emelia.
Well, I think the first step is understanding where you are on the net zero journey, taking stock of how you can better reduce your emissions and support environmental good. So essentially stock taking, create an action plan and identify barriers that will get in the way of that, and then put it into action. I think at the moment there's too much too much talk about what needs to be done. There's a lot of ambitions for 2050 for net zero, but 2050 is quite a long way away. We need action now. And I think that needs to be the focus, not what the perfect scenario is, but actually what things can I do, no matter how small, will help tip the scales.
My take, would be a huge one, but really to offer safe spaces where kind of civil society feel welcome to let's say meaningfully being engaged, because I think we see so many disenchanted people just because they were invited round tables, meetings and so on, and in the end they just lose their time. So I think institutions, but maybe I'm really targeting kind of, for example, research institutions, judicial institutions, political institutions, to really offer spaces where creative initiatives from civil society can find a space to scale up, find sustainable finances, and kind of be boosted. Because I think a lot of creative innovation is really low scale. What we are missing is to really have sustainability in how this initiative can really run to address the future challenges. So let's say offering safe spaces in short.
Yeah, I'll go off of what Anna said. I think that at OADP, we think less about the private sector, but I think the first step for me is to open up proprietary data about the environment. So working with local communities to set up either governance or legal or technical systems to share data with the folks who could use it. Because a lot of this data is held behind, huge paywalls or just is not available for use at all. And I'm thinking about an example that we heard about this past year about seafloor data. And so a lot of these offshore wind companies have a ton of seafloor data, and they are hesitant to share it because they're afraid that this data will be used to block projects. And so I think a lot of these companies could come together, get in the same room as these communities, because the communities might have use for the seafloor data in many applications, and kind of find the incentives to get everyone in the same room to share data safely and without risk or liability for either party. And maybe this is a contractual agreement, maybe this is a technical solution, but I think opening up that data is one thing that companies can do now.
Awesome. Yeah, action plans, making space for civil society, and then sharing the data. I mean, what do you all think about how the space for civil society and data at COP? Amelia, you mentioned that happening right now in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. I mean, I've been to a few COPs, and civil society does have like a seat at the table in a way, in the same way that research institutions and other organizations do, up to a point, and then the point when sort of decisions are going to be made, and then the doors are shut, and it happens between closed doors. But in some ways, I think they have more of a voice there at the UNFCCC than in other forums. So I don't know so I'd love to hear people's thoughts about that, or if you have a really good example about where this is done well. So I'll just open to anyone. Yeah, Anna, go for it.
I can just jump on the fact that maybe you are aware, but I think the People's COP, so the parallel, preceding the actual COP, was a beautiful platform for just gathering stories. So basically, I tried the exercise to register, and of course I wanted to follow. And they really were crowdsourcing stories of individuals affected by climate change, but also their solutions, like which kind of ideas, imaginaries, stakes do you want to bring to the table? And this was basically all run by grassroots actors, more or less organized. I think the fact that there is a People's COP close to the actual COP already says something. So that maybe representation in the actual COP is a bit performative. So maybe we have the indigenous leaders, we have the Sami communities, but they don't really feel considered in terms of offering evidence, not in terms of people that need to sit at the table. So I think here we have the disconnect, that they just are invited, but they're not really steering leaders. And this is a with the I think the step that we should still do. Thanks.
Jump on in, anybody. Yeah, I think we can manage it just jumping in. Go for it.
Yeah, I have a comment to add to Anna's. I've been kind of tracking how data is brought up at COP just informally, and I've seen it mostly from civil society organizations or like small to mid-level nonprofits or NGOs. I haven't seen a ton of information coming out of like transparency around data, data tools coming from the governments themselves, the negotiators themselves. And so it's interesting to kind of see that tension of the folks who are creating and creating the data, using and creating the tools for the data use, and the negotiators who need to use that data, right? And I don't know where that linkage happens, right? And I think that it might happen in some of those side events and different spaces at COP, but yeah, I wonder how much of that is ceremonial and actually meaningful to the civil society folks there.
I guess I'd also like to add about the importance of social media actually in telling different people's views, different perspectives. I think platforms like TikTok, Instagram, they kind of widen and democratize the different viewpoints that we hear that can often be stifled in more formalized settings.
Yeah, awesome point. I totally agree. I mean, my follow-up question was about, to move on from institutions, was what should individuals be doing around climate, maybe from each of your lenses. So maybe, yeah, Emelia, Michelle, and then Anna, what should we all be doing personally? Maybe as data practitioners, seeing as this is a sort of, we're a data science festival.
Yeah, of course. I'll just mention two opportunities from my very specific open environmental data lens. I think that if folks are interested in opening up climate data, we have a cool initiative called Open Climate, and we have monthly calls where we host a speaker each month to talk about a topic related to opening up climate data with a big focus on collaboration. And I can drop that link in the chat. I think that if you're interested on the technical side and like building things and building hardware, you could look into the open hardware movement for environmental monitoring of data. We have some resources on our website for folks who are interested in the technical or the policy side of open hardware. And then third, I think just getting involved with local community science initiatives. I think Anna touched on this, like being in nature can get rid of kind of that alien feeling that we feel. And that is equally important in climate action as, writing your senator or talking to somebody on the phone.
I definitely echo the importance of collaboration as an individual to better understand how to take positive climate action. I would say though that from my perspective, focusing on individual action can often lead to us not considering the more systemic challenges facing climate action. I think it's really important we connect the dots between decarbonising transport with decarbonising buildings, with decarbonising production and the way we produce our food, for example. And I think by focusing on the individual, it can sometimes detract from that. But as an individual, you can galvanize that collective and systemic action, be that through talking to a company about what they're doing to decarbonize, talking, if you rent your home or your office, talking to them about what they're doing to decarbonize and take positive climate action. I think individuals definitely can make a massive difference. But I think the real strength comes in collaboration and working with different organizations, industry bodies, research centers to actually deliver the wide scale and large scale change we need at the pace we need.
Yes, I think it's a tiny balance. Like it's really tough to say where is the right balance, because I also don't want to advocate for everyone to turn into sentinels, because then institutions feel, oh, look, all this free labor, like they're doing our job. What we are is existing for. I think the civil society role in this is really to be a trigger, a push, watchful, to steer institution to take responsibility, and companies. At the same time, I would say what individuals can do, I think, acquire a basic legal literacy as well as tech literacy, scientific literacy, understanding, like being able to defend and understand the law. The legal system is useful because eventually this becomes also discussed in terms of who has the right to do what, and also all the beings that do not have rights as present, and we are just stewards for them. So in a way, I think more and more I see people just closing their head when they hear about litigation. And these litigation, climate litigation, are actually changing governments, are changing policies. So I think we should start in schools, in libraries, in circles of friends, to talk more and familiarize more with the law. And this way also I'm dropping a link to this advocacy that we did in Europe to recognize civic monitoring under our Environmental Information Convention.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
Sorry, I muted myself, because that was a great team effort with many people that were not lawyers, but still teamed up because they understood the meaning of such a recognition. So just a bit of hope that you don't need to be a lawyer to kind of step up to defend and speak legally about climate issues.
Awesome. I think something really interesting happened in the UK, and it's starting to happen worldwide, which is these citizens' climate assemblies. And I think it happened in the UK. It doesn't say this on the sort of UK Climate Assembly website, but this was one of Extinction Rebellion's 3 demands, which then happened. And by all accounts, it's been very successful. And it had a huge amount of like really interesting perspectives and contributions from the sort of random slice of citizenry. And again, it wasn't that everyone was getting involved, but it was just a representative sample of the country. And I do wonder, is that what you all think about that as a sort of positive model to sort of include a variety of voices? I mean, the only thing that I might think about it was whether they're coming from a data perspective is whether there should have been, or maybe we should be building tools for the people on the citizens' assemblies more specifically in order to help them in whatever sort of deliberations they're having. But open to all of you.
Yeah, I definitely think collaboration and bringing different voices to the table is needed to drive action. I think there's often a focus on perceived innovators, be that technological or engineering, but to actually drive action, you need all stakeholders. You need people from financial backgrounds, legal backgrounds, marketing backgrounds, creative backgrounds, to make sure that you connect with the widest group possible and appeal to their key values. And without hearing all those voices, you won't be able to achieve that. And you might get partway through the journey, but it will then just kind of falter and stagnate. And to prevent that, we need to reach as many people and of as many different backgrounds as possible. And that's not just in terms of their careers, but also their socioeconomic backgrounds.
I don't want to take it. Just dropping a small note on the fact that we actually are exploring the convergence between civic assemblies and environmental civic monitoring, and especially climate assemblies. Like also France has a huge, let's say, promotion of this, could offer great space because they are institutionalized. Civic monitoring is a bit more fluid, responding to needs, but that could be really strong fit, especially as civic assemblies often have binding outcomes, so they can really bind institutions to implement the results when this is foreseen by the institutions. But in many European countries, they are being implemented with a kind of a mandate to then being listened. So it's definitely an area of social innovation which is recognized by institutional actors.
I can add a little bit to that too. I think that the citizens' assemblies are a really important step in kind of these invited spaces. So I've heard about a framework of like invited spaces versus creative spaces when you're talking about like civic voice, right? Creative spaces are more, you know, activist created spaces. They're not a part of the government, but these invited spaces are kind of the interface between the public and government. And I think that, you know, these climate assemblies really point to a more deliberate model of taking in civic voice. So in the US, we have, you know, public comment periods and, you know, town halls, and these often don't reflect the need to get everybody in the room that might need to be there. So they might happen at a time where a lot of people in one socioeconomic bracket might be working, right? And like, so you're just not going to hear from them. Or if you have it, or if it takes 3 hours, you're not going to get a mom who has a child and needs to take care of a family, right? And so I think the citizens' assemblies are really hopeful and like great model for other countries and other regions to take on, just because they put a little bit more deliberate focus on that collaboration, on getting everybody in the room. And I don't know if they were compensated for being there, but maybe, you know, having a little bit more equitable design and creating those spaces, I think that's a really positive movement.
Amazing. Thank you for all of that. Thanks, everybody. I thought that was really interesting. There's so many more questions that I would love to ask and to have us explore, but we are at time. So thank you all so much. And for everybody watching, if you've made it all the way to the end with us, thank you very much for joining us. Do check out all of the other really exciting programs on Data Science Festival, and have a lovely rest of the week, and good night.